what we are going to do in this module, we will take many tiny, big, small, all sort of problems and try to solve them, and by solving them we will try to learn basic concept. So, the approach is going to be problem solving based. So, this is a baby problem that we have. So, let us say you are an apartment owner and there are 10 people who are interested in renting one of your apartments, and the maximum they are willing to pay is given in the table. This willingness to pay is for monthly rental. So, for example, and it is in 1000 rupees. So, for example, first person is willing to pay 70,000 rupees per month. Similarly, fifth is willing to pay 22,000 rupees per month, and 10th person is willing to pay 65,000 rupees per month. So, here the simple question is that let us say you have 5 vacant apartments and you want to rent all of them. The key is that you want to rent all of them. What is the maximum rental that you could charge and what is the minimum rental that you could charge, so that all 5 apartments get occupied. Okay. So, this is in a way pricing problem. You have to figure out the way to price your apartments, and the idea is that all of your 5 apartments get occupied. So, if we look at we can do the brute force method, we all are familiar with it. We may not know any theory, any concept, any tool, but if we use common sense, we can solve this very simple problem. If the rent is above 70, and when I say 70, I mean 70,000. So, because whatever number we are saying, it is in 1000. So, if it is above 70,000, no one would rent your apartment. So, none of the apartments would get occupied. If, for example, you come up with the rent 68,000 rupees per month, then you have only first person who would be willing to rent. Why? Because 70 is more than 68. This person is willing to pay up to 70,000, but he has to pay only 68,000. So, he would happily rent one of the apartments, but everyone else maximum willingness to pay is less than 68,000. So, no one else would rent your apartment. So, only one apartment would get occupied. So, let us reduce it further and see what happens. What if we go from 68 to 63, and then we see that 2 people are able to rent the apartment, person 1 as well as person 10. Why? Person 10 is willing to pay 65,000 rupees per month, which is more than 63,000 rupees per month. So, he would happily rent it, but no one else. So, similarly, we can keep on trying with different numbers, and let us say if we come to 55, then let us see what happens. At 55, person 1 will rent, person 10 will rent, 9 will not rent, 8 will not rent, but 7 will rent, because 7 is willing to pay up to 55,000 rupees, and similarly third will be able to rent, but not fifth. We had this tick mark for something else. So, now we see that if it is 55,000 rupees per month, 4 people are able to rent. Who are these 4 people? 1, 3, 7 and 10. These are 4 people, but you have to rent 5 of the apartments. So, if we see who is the next possible? Next possible is 8th after 55,000. 8th will not rent unless the apartment rental is 40,000 rupees per month or less. So, what you need to bring down your monthly rental to 40,000 rupees to rent 5 apartments. But do you think it is the only price at which 5 apartments will be rented? No, even at 39, 5 apartment will be rented, because next person is 6th. Next in terms of that, if we are going decreasing the maximum willingness to pay from after 40, we get to 35. So, any price, let me write it as here P, if P is greater than 35 and less than or equal to 40,000 rupees per month, then exactly 5 apartment should be rented. Now you can be asking this question that if apartment complex owner can get up to 40,000 rupees, why should he reduce the price? That would depend on the environment that we will study further. This is a baby example. We will keep on coming back to this example as well as similar example to understand the concepts in this particular module. So, that was introductory example. Let us understand some basic concepts that we need to know in this course. Let us start with pricing. What is pricing? Pricing is an act of determining the price. And what is price? Price is just the amount of money that is used, that is given by the buyers to the seller in lieu of the object that buyer is getting. Okay. Now, the object, the better term in economics for the object is good and service. So, let us try to understand what do we mean by good and service. Good and service are something, some object or something that gives us happiness, that makes us happy, that gives us satisfaction, that gives us utility. Utility is the technical term, we will see it later on in much more detail. But we should also understand the difference between a good and a service. Good is tangible, we can touch it, we can feel it, but service is intangible, like I am using this pen to write on the screen. So, I can touch the pen, this is a good, but I am teaching you, this is also giving you happiness, that is why you are here, this is giving you satisfaction, this is giving you utility, and it can be felt, but it cannot, it does not have physical form. So, it is a service. So, many times you would see that I as well as many books, we use term good for good as well as service. From context it should become clear whether the term good is being used for just tangible good or it is also being used for tangible as well as intangible good. Another thing that we see, price is important for transaction, and so transaction has 4 things. 2 are obvious, there is a buyer who is buying and there is a seller who is selling. Without them a transaction cannot take place, it is a two-sided thing. But we should also keep in mind that there is another important thing for any transaction, the environment in which this transaction is taking place. Like for example, the apartment complex owner can be the only owner on the island, and then his aim could be not to rent all the apartment, but to maximize his rental income. Okay. Then he should be charging 40 because he does not have any competition. Why should he charge anything less than 40,000 rupees per month? But if this apartment complex owner is not the only owner in the vicinity, there is someone else who is renting, then this apartment complex owner has to think about the rental charged by the other owner. Otherwise, this apartment complex owner would lose all the customer. So, environment also plays very important role. We will come back and talk about some of the most important environments that we would be tackling in this particular course. Another entity that we should pay attention to is the government. What is the role of a government in transaction? Transaction is happening between a buyer and a seller in a particular environment. What is the role that government is having? Think carefully. Other than some basic simple transaction like purchasing a book from a store or purchasing grocery from a grocery shop, you think of the modern transaction. If you are, for example, if you are purchasing your book or grocery from Amazon.com or Big Basket or Flipkart for example, then you are paying in advance many times, and then the seller is delivering the good with some lack. Sometime if you have cash on delivery, you may order and then you refuse to take delivery. So, both parties can misbehave in a transaction. There has to be somebody, some system backing things up to ensure that all these transactions happen smoothly. I am using this government to indicate all the governmental apparatus, police, law. If you are not happy with the way other side has treated you in a transaction, you can go to police, you can go to court. So, that thing is always available in the background, and that is ensuring that transaction happens smoothly. That is why we cannot ignore the role of government in a transaction. Government has another role also, that many of the goods and services cannot be provided by private parties. We will look at them in the later part. We will see that something called public goods can only be provided by the government. So, we will talk about them also. So, government is quite important. Another thing I want to emphasize, that all these transaction is welfare maximizing. What do I mean? And of course, I am speaking loosely, some of them may not be, but let us understand the basic of it, that these transactions are happening in voluntary manner, like someone is not putting a gun or buyer's head or seller's head that you have to sell it or you have to buy it. This is happening voluntarily, and the reason is very simple. So, if this is the price, buyer's value from that item is greater, let me put BV for buyer's value, should be greater than or equal to P. Then only buyer would gain something in this transaction and buyer would voluntarily participate in this transaction. This has a name, we will learn these names later on. Part of our learning is that we become familiar with the jargon of this subject. Similarly, on the seller side, a cost is involved. So, that cost has to be less than this price, otherwise the seller will not be willing to sell that product. Okay. So, the way, if we take out this price, what is happening in society, that a good is going to a buyer who has a value of BV and someone is incurring a cost. So, society as a whole is gaining BV plus minus cost. This is the gain to the society. Okay. Now, we should not only pay attention to environment, I already explained it to you, the why environment is important for pricing. It directly affects the pricing in the market. In different environment, seller will have to price its product differently. So, it is important for us that we learn environment. Why do you think that we should also learn about buyer? Let me give you a short story that will help you understand the importance of buyer. So, let us say that you have an art piece, and let us say for simplicity your value of that art piece is 0. Okay? You have absolutely no value for it. There is a potential buyer who thinks that the value for this art piece is 100, it can be 100,000, it can be 110,000, does not matter, just for number we are writing 0 and 100. The buyer knows seller's value, the seller knows buyer's value, so everyone is well aware of everything, and this art piece is unique, so that it cannot be substituted by some other art piece. Now, seller has to sell this item to buyer. How much should seller ask for? 0, 1, 10, 50, 100, more than 100. If it is more than 100, then seller is not going to able to sell this product. So, it has to be equal to or less than 100. So, if seller thinks that buyer is a particular kind, that buyer will go for transaction as long as buyer is able to gain something. In that case, seller will price it at 99 rupees or maybe at 99 rupees 50 paisa, because in this case buyer is able to gain 1 rupee or 50 paisa by buying this art piece, and seller gets lot more, up to 99 in this example. But if seller thinks that buyer will not like this particular price and reject it, thinking that it is way too high, of course it is not good for buyer, because if buyer rejects it, then buyer gets 0, nothing, and if buyer accepts it, then buyer gets 1 rupee or 50 paisa gain. But that is a very small piece, 1 rupee gain is almost nothing. Just to make a point, a buyer can reject it, that it is way too high. So, in that case seller has to think about the price that would be acceptable to buyer. So, this story I am just trying to illustrate with help of this story that it is important for us to think about buyer also when we are doing the pricing. Ultimately they would be paying the price. So, we have to keep them in mind. Let us talk about buyer in little bit more detail. And mind you, we will again come back to buyer. This is an introductory lecture. So, I am just introducing all the actors and environment that we are going to deal with in this module. But as we progress, we may need more richer environment, more richer description to talk about them. But today is not the day. Today we are just going to learn very basic things about them. So, buyer we are going to assume is a rational buyer, not just any buyer. What do we mean by a rational buyer? That rational buyer means a buyer who has a particular kind of preference. Preference is a word to indicate liking. Like for example, that you visit your friend and your friend asks you, would you like to have a cup of tea or coffee? It is not going to cost you anything. The friend has you do not have to think about that cost that your friend has to incur, you just have to express your liking. So, you may feel that no, you like tea more than coffee, then you can say I prefer tea to coffee. So, this preference relation is indicating that how you rank different choices given to you. Okay. And so, we are going to have little bit more specification. So, first specification is of consistency. What do I mean by consistency? That if on a winter chilly day you prefer tea to coffee, then on another winter chilly day you would again exhibit the same kind of preference. You would not just change your preference if the circumstances are the same. If everything else is exactly the same, your preference does not change. So, there is a consistency in the way you have your likings. You like Coke to Pepsi, then it is going to be Coke all the time over Pepsi. So, this kind of consistency we are talking about. We will get into more details of consistency, we will learn things later on. And the second is decision making ability. Given when your friend gives you a choice, then you are able to decide. Now, there are three possibilities between tea and coffee, that you like tea more, or you like coffee more, or you are indifferent between tea and coffee. Means that you have decided that you like tea or coffee more, you are not confused. This is not a state of confusion. You can tell your friend that I am fine with anything, tea or coffee. What it means that you like tea and coffee equally. There is another situation that we are trying to rule out. The other situation is that you are confused that which one you like. That confusion is not allowed. Now, of course, you can say that we are not rational all the time. There are a lot of problems with this assumption, but let me give you some argument to justify why do we have such assumption. So, first is, let us start with that people are irrational, buyers are irrational, they are not consistent, they do not have decision making ability. Then what does it mean? We cannot talk about their decision making any time. What are they doing? Or in other word, we can also justify, let us say someone has done something, we can always say no, he is like this, that is why he has done. So, this kind of explanation does not serve any purpose. Now, think of a situation where we assume a person is rational and he has done something which you have difficulty accepting it, that why would a rational person do so. Then perhaps you would think about that, okay, what was the environment, what was the condition, what were the circumstances that he did exhibit this kind of behavior. So, this is assuming that a buyer is rational is better than assuming that buyer is not rational, or anyway most of the time we exhibit rational behavior, we behave in consistent manner. When we do not behave in consistent manner, then we can take our basic framework and try to change things and try to explain this irrational behavior, rather than having a framework that does not have much to begin with. So, that is why we are assuming rational buyer, that buyers are rational in their behavior. Next point that I want to make, that each buyer has a reservation price. In the first example that we talked about, you saw that maximum willingness to pay. This reservation price is related to maximum willingness to pay. If person 1 is willing to pay up to 70,000 rupees rent per month, then we can say his reservation price is 70,000. What we mean by reservation price is that maximum amount that someone is willing to pay for one additional item. So, from 0 apartment to renting an apartment, someone was willing to pay up to 70,000 rupees, his reservation price is 70,000. This reservation price can change if you already have, like let us say that this is the beginning of summer season and the first time you see mango in the market. How much would you be willing to pay for the first mango? Perhaps, let me just make a guess, 50 rupees or 100 rupees, does not matter, a number, think of a number, 100 rupees. Then will you be willing to pay same for the second mango? Perhaps not, your willingness to pay would be lower for the subsequent mangoes. So, reservation price is not fixed, it is maximum someone is willing to pay for one additional item. Further, we assume that this reservation price is fixed for a person, it does not change. Next item is consumer surplus. What is consumer surplus? Reservation price is known to buyer only, seller is not aware of it. Now, if seller is selling a product at P, let us take P as 50 and consumer's willingness to pay, reservation price or maximum willingness to pay is 60, and if this transaction takes place, then buyer makes 60 minus 50, that is 10, that is gain to the buyer, and this gain is called consumer surplus. Now, let us come to the next term. So, of course, a buyer has many options in the market. Buyer participates in a particular transaction. Which transaction he or she should choose? Let us say there are 5 options. A, B, C, D, E, and buyer can buy only one of these 5 items. Which one should he buy? This surplus or happiness maximization assumption says that the buyer goes for the item that gives him the maximum surplus. Okay, that is about buyer. We will again revisit these things in much more detail. Now, to represent buyer, the best way to do it is to come up with the demand function. What do we mean by a demand function? So, demand function is basically quantity demanded as a function of price. This demand function can be of individual or it can be of all the individuals together. Let us continue with individual demand function and let us think of mango. Let us say maximum I am willing to pay for the first mango is 50 rupees. So, any price above 50 I will not buy any mango. So, here we have price, here we have quantity. I will come back to the fact that quantity which is dependent variable is on x axis and price which is independent variable is on y axis. Typically, in most of the graphs that we do this in a opposite way. On x axis we put independent variable and on y axis we put dependent variable, but here we are doing something different. Please bear with me, the reason is will become clear soon. Okay. So, this is 50, at 50 one mango can be bought. If price decreases further, then perhaps if price comes to 40, then perhaps the second mango would be brought. Similarly, if price falls further, third mango would be brought. Can you think of a reason that why as price falls more and more mangoes could be brought? Two reasons one can think of. One, that as price decreases you will find other uses of mango, like perhaps right now you are having just mango to eat as fruit, perhaps then you will use it in pudding or in some sort of dessert. So, as price decreases you will find more and more uses of mango, that is one thing. The second reason could be that as price decreases you start comparing, should I have an apple or banana or a mango, and you think that price is low and attractive enough to go for mango. So, you can substitute from other fruits to mango, and that is why as price falls your demand for mango would go up. Okay. This is for individual, we can do for all individuals together. So, what you are going to get here is in this particular way some step like function like this, something like this you are going to get. Here is price, here is quantity. Now, what you can think that an approximation of this step like function, this can be approximated by a graph like this. This is not a very good approximation, but let us say jumps are from rather than from 50 to 40, it is 50 to 41. So, then you will have smaller steps and then here a straight line will make much more sense. Other way to look at it, that rather than thinking in terms of one mango, you can also start thinking of a portion of mango. So, here also step will become smaller and then a straight line can approximate as demand function. So, we can get something like this. So, this price above which this individual, and if we are talking about all the individuals together, the price above which no one will buy any item in the market is called choke price. So, we have seen an example for individual demand function. Let us see an example for all the individual together. Remember, we had an example in which different people had different willingness to pay. So, one thing that we can do, we can arrange them in order and we can give them a new name rather than calling them 1, 2, 3, 4. So, we arrange them in an order. So, here maximum willingness to pay is decreasing. What we can say here, that if P is greater than 70, then quantity demanded of apartment is going to be 0, because no one is interested in renting the apartment. If P becomes equal to 70, and P is between, sorry, if P is greater than 70, then no one will buy. If P is between 65 and 70, at least one person will rent the apartment, and so on. We can look for all the prices, how many apartment will be rented at different prices, and here I have a table that gives exactly like this. If P is greater than 70, no one will rent any apartment. If P is between 65 and 70, one apartment will be rented, and if P is less than 15, all 10 apartments will be rented, and this we can draw as a graph. Okay. Here is quantity, here is, let us say it is a 70, 65, 60, 55, 50, 45, 40 and so on. So, we can here also have 0, sorry, here we can have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I am not going to complete it, just to give you basic idea. So, if price is above 70, no one is going to buy anything. At 70, we can say either 0 is possible or 1 is possible. At 65, 2 is possible. At 60, 3 is possible. So, in fact, we can say that at 70, 0 and 1 both are possible. So, we can also do something like this. So, we are going to get basically a step function like this. At 55, we are going to have 4, at now we have to come down to 40, and here we will have 5 and so on. This is a number that I have used, you have to use to check the number. So, this is exactly the graph that we get, and further. So, this we are getting is something called a demand function or a demand graph. Okay. Sometime we, so basically here we are writing Q as a function of P. Sometime we also write it like this, that P is equal to 30 minus P, 30 minus Q. This is not exactly a demand function, but the way we say things, we accept it as a demand function. This is basically inverse demand function. Why inverse? Because we can always write it like Q is equal to 30 minus P. So, we are going to get a graph like this. Here is 30, here is 30, here is Q, here is P. So, one reason I will tell you immediately that why P is on y axis and Q is on x axis. So, the first textbook of economics came in 1885. It was called the Principle of economics. Alfred Marshall was the writer and he has drawn the curve, he drew the curve like this. So, we are continuing with that thought, but there is more important mathematical reason to it that we will learn later on. So, this is the way we get the graph. If we want to be certain, we should say Q is equal to maximum of 30 minus P comma 0. Why? Because for each P we have to give the Q. So, if P is, let us say 60 and we are writing it like this, what will we get? We will get Q is equal to minus 30, which is wrong. Q can never be less than 0, and that is why we are writing it like this. Whenever we encounter negative Q, it should be replaced by 0. So, this is our demand function. Again, we will revisit these things in much more detail. What are the problems with assumption of rationality? We talked about that how reservation price is fixed, it does not change, but it does change. Let me give you a story to convince you that reservation price is not fixed, it changes. Let us say, again you will say I am fond of summer month, perhaps it is chilly winter outside, so I am dreaming of summer. So, let us say that it is a hot summer month and you are lying outside, it is very hot, you are playing with your friends and your friend tells you that would you like to get a cold drink, and you say yes. Then he says that I do not know how much is going to be the price, but I have when we came to this place we saw a small sack, I think that sack may be having cold drink. How much when you know what is the maximum price that you should be paying? This is one story. Now, consider a slightly different situation. Everything is the same, but while coming to this playground you guys saw not a small sack, but really a 5-star hotel, you know, and so then your friend asks you how much you should be willing to pay. In both cases, pause for a moment and think about that how much would you be willing to pay for one cold drink. And I bet that almost for all of you that you would be willing to pay higher for when your friend is supposed to bring the cold drink from the 5-star hotel and not from a small sack. You cannot say that 5-star hotel has better environment. You are going to consume this cold drink on the playground, not in these hotels. Okay? So, you would be consuming exactly the same cold drink from whether it comes from the sack or it comes from a 5-star hotel. Then why you should be paying different reservation price? Remember, we had assumed that your reservation price is in your mind, how much you are willing to pay and how much you are willing to pay for a particular good, and the good is not changing, but your reservation price has changed. So, that can be a criticism of assumption of rationality, that it does not work. My defense is that of course, we get influenced by such setting, but if we think deeply, we are doing same thing again and again, then perhaps we will figure out these things with much more accuracy. Another problem is that many times we think, you know, when we talk about consumer surplus or reservation price, all these things, many times we think in terms of percentage gain rather than in terms of absolute gain. Let me give you another example. So, you are interested in buying iPad, you know, and of course, you are not using any online market to buy this item. You are moving from one shop to another shop and you go to a mall and their iPad is selling for 80,000 rupees. And when you were about to pay, your friend, you met a friend who told you, no, in the other mall it is selling for 79,000 rupees. Would you go to this other mall, which let us say for example is 1 kilometer away, to save this 1,000 rupees? Think about it and write on your notebook. Second situation is that you are interested in buying Kindle, and in one mall where you went to, it is selling for 8,000 rupees, and your friend, exactly same thing happens, you encounter of your friend and he tells you in the other mall 1 kilometer away it is selling for 7,000 rupees. In this case also you should be able to save 1,000 rupees. Would you go to the other mall to buy the Kindle? If your answer is different in two different cases, then perhaps you are thinking in percentage saving term. The cost to go to another mall that is 1 kilometer away would be the same in both the cases. It should not matter. In both the cases you would be saving 1,000 rupees. So, if you are willing to go in one case, you should be willing to go in the other case also. Okay. But that does not happen. Most of the time we think in terms of percentage saving rather than in terms of absolute saving. Third problem is it is about maximizing surplus. You remember three assumption we had, that people have reservation price. The first example I gave you, which says that yes, there can be reservation price, but they may not be necessarily fixed or immutable. Second example was that buyers care about consumer surplus, but here we have seen that it is not as simple as this. You think sometime in terms of percentage term, sometime in terms of absolute term. As per the assumption, it should always be in absolute term. Next is reference price. What was the third assumption? The third assumption was that you opt for an item, you go for an alternative that maximizes your consumer surplus. The problem is many times we are not aware of all the options, all the alternative accessible to us. Sometimes we do not want to keep on checking the prices at different places. So, of course, you can say that search cost, because searching is also costly. So, I am not talking about that, but most of the time what we have in our mind, that is a reference price, and if we are getting an item for a price lower than that reference price, then without searching, without checking, we go for this lower price thing. So, that maximizing consumer surplus also gets violated. So, we have to be careful about all these things. In the next lecture, I am going to talk about seller and most likely about environment also. Thank you.